Welcome to your Mental Health Matters podcast, a community-minded mental health podcast providing real-life mental health talks supporting parents, educators, and students.
Welcome back to another episode of Your Mental Health Matters. I'm so excited to have my friends here, Mel and Chantel, and today we're talking about strategies and supports for managing stress, burnout, and caregiver fatigue. Last session we really talked about supporting children, and this session we'll be really focusing on supporting adults, parents, and educators as well. So welcome, Chantel and Mel. So good to be with you all today. How's your day going?
It's going good. It's my favorite part of my day when we get to do this podcast, so I love it.
Too.
That's so good. Well, so good to be with you. So just to let you know, 3 things we're going to get out of today's session are work-life balance, setting boundaries, recharging, and managing stress. So if those are 3 things that might be helpful or areas that might be challenging, we'd love just to journey and unpack that a bit more today. First, before we get started, we just want to thank our local community for the response to this podcast. We've had over 100 responses of suggestions, ideas of some topics we can cover this year. So we for sure won't get to all of them today, but we're going to be starting. And over the course of this season, maybe we'll have to even do a few more seasons to cover all of these responses. We've got all of these different ideas woven into the podcast we'll be talking about today. So before we get started, I want to talk about why do we get stressed? Where does this stress and fatigue come from? I know the last 18 months to 2 years, we've been all feeling it. Why does that happen in our brains and bodies? Let's, ladies, unpack that for us a little bit.
I think one of the really big things that we need to be aware of is we all have a window of tolerance. And that window grows and shrinks depending on our environment and what we're going through and our own stress factors. And the more stress we have, the smaller that window, which the less capacity we have to tolerate those big emotions. So one thing that I always tell clients when I'm working with them is recognizing that window of tolerance.
Yeah.
What does it feel like when it's big? What does it feel like when it's shrinking? And how can you tell? So I'm a huge somatic therapy fan, so I always love bringing it back to the body.
So good.
So being able to recognize what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like when your window is shrinking.
Yeah.
So for myself, I've come to the point where I recognize that I clench my jaws and my shoulders go high. So at certain points throughout the day, I make that conscious effort to bring my shoulders down, take that deep breath, and unclench my jaws.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge believer that when you're aware of it and what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like, that's when you can make the change, because we can't change what we're not aware of. So building that emotional awareness and recognizing our capacity. And this is actually a really great conversation to have with kids. We use fill your bucket. How full is your bucket? When your bucket is full, your window of tolerance is big. When your bucket is empty, your window of tolerance is low. So being able to have that conversation with children is really important too.
Yeah,
because we all have buckets.
It's so true, right? And just kind of recognizing awareness is that first step. When is our kind of life or heart or mind getting filled up? I know we do some recycling, and sometimes I'm not the best at it. And I've got a garage full of like recycling we need to take to the depot. And you can tell, okay, the bins are getting full, we need to go. So what does that look like in your life when those bins are getting full? Whether it's stress around COVID or stress around your work or sometimes kids being more at home, recognizing what are some of those things that fill your bucket of stress or make you feel more stressed, and just being aware of those. How do you find it, Mel?
Yeah, and you know, I'm listening to you talking. I love the way you always compare it to different things like the bins and stuff like that. It's really great with getting your mind going and thinking of it in different ways, right? Because not every way is going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
But what maybe we can do is to tell our audience a little bit about what's happening in our body.
Yeah.
And I think you talked about the window of tolerance, but some people, it would be really good for us to get a little bit of information about what is happening.
Yeah.
What is happening? So sometimes we've heard of fight, flight, and freeze. These are stress responses in our body. We as professionals know this, and we as individuals feel it, but we don't know what's really happening sometimes. And just kind of breaking it down, that the brain is actually sending a signal to your heart, and your heart is telling you, and your head is telling you, red alert, something is going on. So your heart starts pumping faster. It doesn't even have to be a true stressor. It could be a perceived stressor. And that's the thing that we need to recognize in ourselves, in our children, is if it feels that way.
Yeah.
That is the piece. So the heart is pumping faster to get blood circulating and pulling to the hands for fight, or to the feet, flight.
So true.
Or you may shut down, freeze. This is a response that the brain, the head, the heart, and the body all work together.
Very true.
And if you do not know your in-flight response or fight response, how are you supposed to know how to cater it, conquer it, overcome it, and recognize it? And again, with your window of stress and the window of tolerance, how are you supposed to know if you're kind of vibrating on the inside because you have that stress hormone building up and you need to get a release? How are you getting that release? Right? So these are all things that are really important for us to understand. That stress hormone builds up, our heart is going, we got to get it out, we need to pace while we're having that argument with someone. That prefrontal cortex is shut down and we're back in that emotional brain and we're saying things that we don't mean or we don't remember because we're not engaged here. And the blood is not rushing to here anymore, is it?
So
It's back there, and it's basic functions of human survival in our body.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you're mentioning too, Chantal, that trauma can definitely impact our stress response and make us more stressed and fatigued too. Tell us a bit more about that.
So I love talking about trauma. And I think once we're aware of the impact, because a lot of people think of trauma as that one incident or the event that happened, but there's a lasting legacy of trauma that people don't understand, where their body's actually constantly in survival mode. So that fight, flight, freeze, and that we often resort to those survival modes when we've experienced some trauma in our past, because our bodies and our brains are built for survival. That's what they want to do, and like Mel said, sometimes we can't tell the difference. Our brains can't tell the difference between a perceived threat and an actual threat.
So true.
Same thing, your brain can't tell the difference between a bear and stage fright, right? It's the same system in the brain that releases that cortisol through our body. So for people who've actually been through a lot of trauma, they actually have higher levels of cortisol because of what they've been through, because their body is actually saying, oh, we've been here before, we know what happens, let's not let that happen again. So trauma definitely impacts that automatic nervous system, so we want to make sure that we're tuning into that. And I think I really like the point of recognizing in your body, because I have so many adults that will come to me and they'll say, Chantal, I go from 0 to 60 so fast.
No cues, have no idea.
I have no idea. And I'm like, before you actually get to 5, your body's already telling you a lot of really good information. It's just we're no longer listening to our bodies.
That's right.
So that's why when it comes to the window of tolerance, there's signs, there's warning signs. It's just we often push them away.
We do.
I was really bad for that, where I would push it away. I always equated to Ross from Friends. I'm fine. I'm fine.
It's okay.
So don't be a Ross, right? Don't pretend it's fine when it's obviously not. Everybody else around me could tell it wasn't fine.
Yes.
But
so
being
true.
able to recognize that.
That awareness piece, like I'm like, okay, I haven't experienced trauma in my life, I haven't experienced anything super traumatic, but the truth is, whether it be at work or home, we experience small traumas.
Every day.
So there's certain topics or things that come up and I just feel that fight or flight, I feel that cortisol, and instantly it's like I'm expending 2 or 3 times the amount of energy I need to. It's like having a hole in my cup. My energy for the day is just getting super drained. And that's what we want to focus on now. We talked about understanding a little bit of how we get stressed, how we get fatigued, but how do we support that? So what are some practical strategies that we can do to manage and be able to recover from stress and fatigue? I know one key area is work-life balance. We've had some great questions around that, but part of it is just being real about, what are some challenges that we face? Mel, Chantal, what do you find? What are some of those challenges you face on the daily in terms of work-life balance?
I would say the schedule for sure. For me, it's finding time for everything, and self-care always gets put on the back burner.
Sure does.
Right? And so I find the hardest part for me is, one, being a Ross. I'm fine.
Yes.
And then the second part is that window, because being in the role of a counselor, you want to help people. And I find sometimes I stretch myself thin to meet the needs. So setting boundaries, I think that is a huge one for me. And I've been learning over the last few years. I mean, I'm human, I'm growing, I'm learning. So that's something that I've been trying really hard, is to set boundaries, which I know we'll get into a little bit today.
So good. So for me, I've got 2 kids. We've got a practice, we've got work, we've got family, we've got friends, we've got COVID. There's just so much going on in family life. It's busy every day, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of recognizing some of those, big rocks of things I have to do in the day, and what's the sand, what's the stuff that, okay, it seems important, but really not. So finding the balance between those things and just recognizing those commitments. I know for me, especially for the past 6 months, it's just exhausting. Like, life is exhausting these days. I don't know about you guys, but it's like, oh my goodness. So I've had to at least take like an hour of downtime at night. Once the kids go to bed, I got to get through all that too. They're amazing, they're great, but busy for sure. Yeah. And being really regimented about my rhythm and routine at night of recharging. I'm doing certain things with my wife and for myself, because if I don't do those, I'm just exhausted the next day. What do you find, Mel?
Well, and I think the balance is what we keep talking about, and finding what works for you and feels okay within your heart and your head, because a lot of us can't say no, or we feel like we can't because we're helpers in the community, we're helpers within our own caregiving, within our lives, with our children. And so to be able to recognize boundaries is great, recognizing what feels comfortable with you, as you said as well, that what works, what you can do, what can you put off. But I think, in all honesty, when I look back at what's working in my family, is giving myself permission to let things go.
Yeah.
And not holding on to it.
Yes.
Because I think that's a huge piece for me, because I'm the hardest on myself.
So
and
true.
I can't forgive myself sometimes. Did I drop this ball?
Yeah.
Did I let this person down? Did I miss this email? And what if the whirling and twirling I do, thinking of what that caused them because I let them down?
Yes.
Yeah.
So giving myself permission and grace to go, okay, I can get to it tomorrow, and know that they understand, because they are feeling it too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing, is we're all feeling it equally. So if we could put that into perspective and do that with our teams, with our staff, with our colleagues, then maybe we won't be so hard on ourselves and have these high expectations that we wouldn't put on our own kids or our own lives that way. So why would we? Why would we do that for our peers?
Yeah.
We really do need to give ourselves grace that way.
So good. So the idea of grace, self-compassion, it's like you're putting the plug in the drain. So instead of just draining our energy, like, hey, let's just chill, let's put a plug in it and actually keep that energy for ourselves,
That's
which I
right.
love. I've got a listener question here for the two of you in terms of working around that stress. So missing, let's say, perhaps work days, running out of sick days. Listeners kind of just wondering, how do I navigate the demands of my family, the demands of my kids, being home perhaps with COVID symptoms, just having to stay home from school and everything else? How do you navigate that, and what recommendations do you have too?
Well, and as I've said before, I have 5 kids, so it's a constant juggle.
Great.
And you learn to make a priority list of things that you can deal with in the day. And if you're home with your kids and they have to be online, you have to be taking that time to be with them, which is very frustrating and stressful. How do we do both? How can we do it all? So you have to accept the fact that there's going to be things dropped and missed. And that's another piece of this, is recognizing that. And you're saying, but how do I navigate it as a family, as a mother, as a coworker, as a colleague? It is really, I'm a list maker.
Yeah.
And I put the things that are top, and that's what I follow. And I cross it off, and there's that sense of accomplishment that I've crossed it off my list to get to the next thing. And recognizing, of course, I'm going to miss some things. What do we do then? Just make a list for the next day.
Very true.
I always say human.
It's very true, right? We are all human. I always say you can't do better than your best.
Well, and that's it.
Do your best, work collaboratively, reach out to your support system.
Yeah.
Those are a few practical things as well, just to navigate with perhaps your employer, chatting with them about some of the challenges and working creatively towards some of those solutions. I think the biggest thing is reaching out. Sometimes we struggle in isolation, think, oh, this is so stressful, this is so hard. Have those tough conversations. Reach out to friends, reach out to your employer, and making sure that you're building and reaching out to your team
As
on
you
that
said
side of things
earlier,
too.
a buddy system we talked about earlier.
Totally.
Having that buddy system so that if you know you're missing time because you have a sick child, you have a peer or colleague who can help you out at work to make sure you're not missing deadlines, or maybe you could kind of play off each other, that they helped you one time and you help them. It is really important that we show each other our vulnerability and ask for help in these times, and talk to our leaders and talk to our supervisors when we are feeling that way.
So true. I guess a key part of that too is setting boundaries.
That's
How do you
it.
say no?
You practice, say no all the time and see how it feels, and maybe it gets easier.
Yeah.
Right? Try it with a little thing is actually what I would say, all jokes aside. Try it with a little thing. Your boss or your supervisor asks you to do something. Try something that you kind of feel okay with if you do. If they go, well, I really need you. That's not the hill you're going to die on.
Yeah.
And I think learning to say, let me think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
I
So
think
good.
that is so important because we want to jump in, and nobody's in this profession as a counselor or a teacher that is only out for themselves.
That's
so a lot of times we will sacrifice our home time or our family time to do our jobs. And I think a really big part is being able to say, let me think about it.
Right.
And actually having that time to respond away from the pressure.
Yeah.
And the guilt of saying no.
Yeah.
And then finding an appropriate way to say, you know what, thank you for thinking of me. I thought about it. And unfortunately, my bucket just isn't full enough right now.
Yeah.
And being able to communicate when your window of tolerance is low, when your bucket is empty. I was just thinking, kind of going back a little bit, but for my husband, he's a shift worker.
Right.
So, and he's gone 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so he finds it really hard balancing that life-work balance. So
True.
we actually had to sit down and have this conversation about what does our life look like when you're on shift versus off,
Yes.
and helping each other out, right? And knowing what we can let go during the week that we're both working,
Yeah.
and just finding an appropriate management system that works for the both of us so that we're not holding resentment
Yeah, so true.
towards each other. So I just wanted to kind of go back and say that communication of how you're actually doing, how full your bucket is. If you're running on empty, be able to communicate that.
Yeah, and you got to find a language that works for you. Like, not everyone's going to feel comfortable using the bucket filler language. They may
No.
just say, I'm maxed,
Yeah.
or thanks for thinking of me, but, you know, I'm at my limits, or peace out, that's it for today. I
Right.
got to go home and sleep because I had a stressful day, right? And
Yeah.
And that's a big part of boundaries too, setting boundaries as a team. You know, with my wife and I like to say yes to everything. So I check with her first. So we actually make decisions as a team now instead of me just running into everything. And also I have that time scheduled out. You know, a lot of leadership podcasts talk about blocking off time. So there's only a certain amount of time in a day that I'm free to help or do things or work. So in
Right.
terms of setting boundaries at work, having that schedule, you know, at this time I'm done for the day.
Yeah.
You know, obviously educators, teachers, sometimes it seems like the schedule never ends. You're marking at home, you're doing all these things. We'll find some predictable rhythms and routines with that a little bit.
Yeah.
What time are you going to turn off the phone? Turn off the email?
Oh, I love that.
All that different stuff, right? And that's one of our listener questions. How do I set boundaries at work?
I like what you just said.
yeah.
Turning off your phone, like, is that an option?
Can I do that? Is that okay?
Please, yes, you have to. I have to now these days. Like after probably about 6, 7 p.m., like
Yeah.
no tech. I like to watch a little show, like listen to some music. It literally stresses me out when my wife is like on her phone doing something. I'm like, no, just do that tomorrow.
And you know, as leaders and people in the community, we have to recognize that when we are on our phone in the evening, and doing emails, it's telling our colleagues, our team, that I'm working in the evening, and it's almost giving them that permission to turn off theirs if I'm doing mine.
Totally.
So in my role as coordinator, I have to be cognizant of when I'm sending emails, I'm saying do not respond, or I'll wait until the next day to send the email, knowing very well some of them may feel they have to respond now just
Right.
because I am. So I
Yeah.
have to get better at putting those limitations on myself and turning my phone off and keeping
Right.
it off. But respecting that on the other end of it, because that's exactly, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
do-
Yeah.
Right? I have
With
to
our
follow
kids.
it, right?
Totally.
For myself.
And this kind of ties into caregiver and kind of fatigue as teachers,
Yes.
as educators, as parents. You can't turn off kids. You know, we can't turn off our burdens
we?
or worries of kids and things like that too.
I've
So
tried.
not only the boundaries in terms of phones and emails and that stuff, but the care part. We had a great
Yeah.
listener question in terms of from a systemic perspective. How can we support, you know, good mental health of 20 plus students in our classroom, of our colleagues, of our teachers, of parents? I mean, there's just so much at this particular time in life to support, and how do I navigate all that well? It can just feel like a lot.
It would be, absolutely. Just so you all know, viewers, listeners, we do have a basketball game going on in the next room. So if you hear some noise in the background, those are just the lovely children in the background letting us know they're there. So
Right?
yeah, so I just want to bring that up. So you're wondering if you hear some screaming, there's no one in trouble, I promise.
We're having fun. It's all
We're
fun.
having fun, yes.
Those are
Sorry,
happy
I squirreled. Yeah,
That's
I
okay.
squirreled.
So a systemic perspective, good mental health. How's a teacher, as a parent, how can I support my kids, my classroom,
Yeah.
I
and
think
support myself?
a really great way, or a really good starting point for that is introducing the topic within your classroom.
Right.
That we're all human and we all have bad days and we all have hard
Love
days.
that.
Yeah.
And making it a part of your classroom routine, being able to say, okay, you know what, the energy in here is getting a little restless. How about we throw on a mindfulness meditation. I always love the mindfulness because it
Yeah.
resets everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So introducing it at that level in your classroom, but then also as a school, what can you do to promote mental health and making it a part of a conversation? And I know that we've been doing a lot of conversations about mental health, but then once you leave that room, it often just falls off the side of our desk.
Sure does.
So being able to actually find time to implement what's being talked about, and I strongly believe that, like you were saying, Mel, as a leader, it comes from the top down.
It
So
sure
being
does.
able to have those conversations at the higher levels as well, and listening,
Yeah.
hearing what your colleagues are saying. Like you said, the buddy system, that can work for those days where you feel empty and
Yeah.
you need to recharge. You can have somebody that you can go to and vent to and get your validation, and then start to problem solve for sure.
So true. And it's kind of, you think about the systems involved. So I got my family, whether it's your kids, whether a partner, if you're with someone as well. Okay, what can I do in that system in terms of talking about zones of regulation, or just
Right.
doing some of those fun interactive activities at home,
Yeah.
whether it's just adults or kids at your home too. Let's build that literacy. Like you said, Chantel, in the classroom setting. Some of my favorite classrooms to visit, they've got kind of the zones or other emotional awareness language posted in the classroom. They have those kind of mental health minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, we're kind of getting to the yellow zone. We all just need to pause here,
Love that.
unwind, recognize for ourselves as educators, as EAs, as teachers, when we're kind of recognizing we need to do that for ourselves and modeling that to our students, and also recognizing, hey guys, we're kind of in the yellow zone here as a class. Let's just dial down for 5 minutes and come back.
Yeah.
Love that stuff. And then how do we engage our staff? So maybe just a buddy or a friend in your school. It might not be the whole staff, but how can I feel like I'm making a difference, or just kind of connecting with my own mental health or emotional wellness at school, even if it's just with one, co-teacher or a friend at school. And then as a system or as a school division, how do I feel like I'm meaningfully engaging? So maybe it's reaching out to your principal, school counselor, whatever that looks like, and just kind of engaging. I know, Mel, you're an amazing leader in your school board in this. Give us some advice. Give us some thoughts of what you find is helpful too.
Well, one of the things I've been talking to a lot of counselors and principals lately is our teachers are so overwhelmed and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And they know they need help, but they get stuck.
Right.
And they'll close their door and they'll just power through the day. And they're afraid to actually ask for help. Not afraid as in fear of the response, but it's just too much, too big to take on.
Totally.
So front loading it is what I say. I say to the counselor, I say to the principal is, how about if we get some resources together, like zones, put it up on their walls for them, help the teacher, help the educator build that up so that they literally know when they're getting to that point, it's all ready to go.
Yeah.
And front load it before it gets too much, right? Because as we continue on through our school year, the stress comes on more and more. If we can get some of these things in place now and support, whether that be the counselor comes in and does a lesson and the teacher just listens.
Yeah.
So the teacher who is very stressed as well and feeling really overwhelmed has an opportunity to observe the kids and observe that it's really working. Because a lot of times it's not a matter of not wanting to do it, just not being able to get into the headspace to do it. And so they need somebody to help guide them to get into that headspace.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of staff this year are they're feeling the impact of it.
So
It's been
overwhelmed.
such a hard year already.
Yeah.
And I think some staff feel that if they open up and they talk about it, it's just going to all come out.
Right.
So we're
Right.
just going to keep it in and keep
Yeah.
it together for as long as I can until
Right.
you can't anymore.
And there's
right?
that stress hormone that's going to build up and then it's
Yeah.
going to explode and you'll go into fight flight, right?
Yeah. So making sure that you're finding time to be able to recognize when you're holding it together. I think one of the beautiful things that we do here at our school is prayer partners.
Okay.
So we have just a random staff member who we pick a name and then we just leave little notes and gifts and we pray for them and we just let them know. So in the morning you
lovely.
come in and there might be a little treat in your mailbox with a little prayer,
Yeah.
knowing that somebody's thinking about you. And I have to admit, I love it. Like
So good.
it starts your day off on that foot.
Yeah.
Like somebody's thinking about me. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying last time during the podcast is finding ways to validate your staff.
Right.
Being able to let them know how great they're doing. There's definitely hard conversations to have, but teachers are doing such a great job
Yeah.
handling this. And last year with the online, then offline, and back online. So giving them that recognition of the
So
hard
true.
work that they're putting in. It's never going to go
Yeah.
unwanted, is that
Yeah.
Yeah.
recognition?
I think being a teacher, it's probably the hardest job in the world.
Oh,
I've been a
absolutely.
teacher, I've been a school counselor, I've been a
Yeah.
psychologist. I honestly, that's the hardest. You know,
It
being
is.
a teacher, being in the classroom every day. So reaching out to your supports in the school, I think, is so important. Love what you're saying, Chantel, because being in schools energizes me. And I've been a part of some amazing staffs where there's just this culture of support and care. And even if it's a small group of people, you know, 2 or
Yeah.
3 teachers, whatever it looks like, I look forward, you know, to hanging out with all of you, to coming to visit some of these schools in this local area, because there's just such amazing people. And so building those connections, I think, in our local community, both at home and at school
And
or
healthy
your other
connections.
workplace, is
Healthy
so key.
connections, though, because you could have the connections
Right?
that deplete you.
I'm just exhausted.
Yes,
COVID's the worst.
Yes,
Ah.
and you talk and you
Yeah.
end up
Right.
both spinning and you end
Mm-hmm.
up depleting each other more. So finding the appropriate connections is also just as important.
Because negativity is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
It sure is.
That's something
It
that
sure
we
is.
don't talk about a lot. So if you're walking into a staff room or an area that's you can feel the negativity,
Mm-hmm.
probably not the best place to
That's
be
right.
on a bad day, because
Right.
you're just going to start it to tailspin and hype each other up. So being able to also find a way to remove yourself from those conversations.
true.
Again, going back to setting
Yeah.
boundaries. Like I hear what you're saying, but
Right.
I'm gonna go eat my room.
Yeah, right?
exactly.
We all know what to do. Sometimes just a matter of doing it, right?
Yeah.
So we want to make sure we reach and cover all of your questions, listeners. Thank you for them. We got one last question here for today, and then we'll talk about some real practicals of recharging and managing stress. So the last question is balancing the mental load of providing growth and opportunities for students or children, whether it be as a parent or teacher, with kind of feeling okay to say no. Maybe like right now I'm only at 70% as a teacher, and I can't do all the awesome, amazing things I usually
Yeah.
do. How can I do
that
my
in
best?
itself is the answer to it.
Right?
Yeah.
Is recognizing where you're at and
Mm-hmm.
giving that. That is the piece of it.
And being able to articulate that to the students as well, finding an age-appropriate way to say, to let them know that you're running on
That's it.
70%.
Yeah, that's great.
Because a lot of the kids in your classroom might also be running on 70
Yeah.
or 20. So letting them know that even as an adult that's leading a classroom, that you're not always at 100%. So I think, Joel, you answered your own question.
Yeah, it's
There you go.
validating.
Right?
And I know we're cognizant of the time. We only have a little bit of time left, so we want to make sure we get in every last little bit
Yeah.
of morsel there. So
Totally, yes, so good. And just as a parent too, same deal. The kids at home, sometimes I'm not the best for my kids that day, saying,
Yep.
hey, kids, this is a tough day.
I need 5. I need
Right.
5 minutes. Just need
And-
mama time.
I have to bring in circle of security
Yeah.
because it's in my DNA at this point.
Yeah, me
So
too.
good.
Being able to set boundaries, bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind.
Yeah.
Being able to set boundaries in a kind way and being able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just say no to a child, they need to know why.
Totally.
Say, it's been a long day, you know what, to play that game right now would be really loud. Maybe we could do something different instead. So I have kids that come into my office and they're like, oh, can we play the break the ice game, which is really loud? And I'm
Great.
like, oh, you know what? That game's a little bit loud for today.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah.
mind doing something? Could we do this instead? And usually kids will apply, but they just saying no can shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You give reason. It's respect. It's mutual respect. How do you expect to get the respect back if you're not giving it?
And especially with our kids, I think as parents communicating that
Yes,
is so
so
important because
true.
our kids' expectations can dial down. Jayla, right now Dad's a little tired. Let's just
Yes.
take it easy, right? Whatever it might
Exactly.
be.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we cover this recharging and managing stress.
Yeah.
In our final segment here, give me your top 1 or 2 strategies of being able to manage stress, of navigating it, and being able to recharge.
Well, I think if this is the end of the segment, I'd like to. I feel as if the biggest piece that I want to land on is routines.
Yeah.
Getting those routines in place and sticking to them, honoring them as much as you can. Because through the repetition of routine, you actually, it becomes easier and you become almost on autopilot mode, and it's an expectation in your brain and your body. If you look at it like a plane of tall grass, you have to get to the other side. The first path you take to get to the other side may be easy, and you're going, okay, I'm going across, the grass is moving, you get this good pathway. That's like your brain, the neurons firing. That good pathway gets nice and worn. But what if that path isn't the right way? What if you need to make a different path, which is what we do in our everyday life when we choose a different decision of what we're going to do? So you go on this new path, like our neurons firing, it goes that way. The more you use it, the more that path gets worn, the easier it's going to go to be a go-to for you. So that path gets nice and worn, your new path, this grass will grow over.
So
this
true.
grass will all of a sudden not be as used as much.
Yeah.
That's our everyday life, isn't it? So the more we do it, the more we have a routine, the more that path gets worn, our neurons are firing that way, that connection is going to be the easier way to go. Routine, 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 to help us get to where we need to be.
That we don't have to think about it. It just
That's
becomes
it.
automatic.
And that's what we need to do. And that's why it's so important.
Because right now, a lot of us are running on autopilot,
All the time.
but we're not making conscious decisions.
Yes.
Right.
So we need to make the conscious decision to find a path that works for
Yeah.
us.
Mm-hmm.
I think for myself, one of the best things that I do to recharge and to manage stress is reflection.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because if you're not reflecting on your day
Yeah.
and what you're doing, then you can't change.
Yeah.
You're just continuously on autopilot. So at the end of the day, I like to sit down with my journal
So good.
and I look at that day. What did I do that got me closer to my goals today? And what kind of steered me off my path?
Yeah.
And not that I'm going to judge myself
Yeah.
about that. I'm going to take it for what it is. And then I'm just going to go the next day and see how I got towards my goals and what's taken me off my path. And if there's anything that I can slightly shift. So, for example, spending a lot of time doing puzzles, which is you think is great and it's
Right.
relaxing. But when you're spending 4 hours just to avoid doing work,
You're shutting down or you're
it's
avoiding
shutting down.
something.
Right.
So
Yeah.
being reflective on your self-care as well, because it's a fine line. Sometimes it's not self-care, sometimes it's shutting down. So being very reflective on my behaviors and being intentional about it, I think
Wow.
is
Great.
probably.
That's so good. Awareness and acceptance. We all do those puzzling things, whether it's puzzles or something different. We kind of just get a little sidetracked there. So
Yeah.
just being aware of those moments is so helpful. For me, it's got to be my emotional dashboard. Like driving a car,
Love it.
I think of emotions like that, right? So whether you're feeling fear, anger, sadness, whatever it might be, it's kind of like the check engine light that comes on. Hey, maybe there's something wrong with my car. I should probably check this out. Look under the hood, whether it be journaling, talking to a friend, doing
Yeah.
something, and actually tuning in instead of tuning out emotion.
Yes.
Because tuning out emotion, that's the recipe for stress, for
Yes.
burnout, for fatigue, all that stuff. But tuning into our emotions and daily processing them. With the younger children, I talk about flushing a toilet. You know, how often do you flush the toilet? Every time you use it. You know, so we as adults need to be mindful. We have those emotions. Let's not keep them inside. Let's press the flush button by journaling, by talking to someone, and actually moving through them, acknowledging them,
Yes.
and processing them. So I think that piece is so key to move kind of from emotionally fragile or stressed out to being agile and just to being able to understand and cope with stress more effectively.
Love
I
your
would-
dashboard analogy. Love that.
I would love to just add 2 words to that whole thing: without judgment.
Yeah,
So
there we
true.
go.
Being able to reflect and acknowledge and accept without judgment.
Exactly.
And just realizing that tomorrow is another day and that maybe you can do it better tomorrow.
Yeah.
If I lay in bed at night and I reflect on my day and I know that I've done the best that I could for that day,
Yeah.
that is enough. And if there's some areas that I haven't done the best that I could,
Yeah.
then I just make note of it and I try better the next day.
Totally. It's like a guilt piece, just observing it and say, hey, yeah, I feel like, I spent too much time on my puzzles today or whatever it might be, right? That's okay. Okay, that's the check engine light. Maybe I should just tweak that a little bit for
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Start fresh. So whether it's anger, sadness, whatever emotions we're feeling,
Yeah.
it's okay to feel them and it's probably helpful. So just being able to recognize those is so key. As we wrap up for today, we always do this segment, doing it daily. So being able to think for the next month, how am I going to walk this out? How am I actually going to take what I've heard today and apply it?
Right.
I know last month what I talked about was getting outside. And I'm happy to report there's so many days I went for this beautiful bike ride once I put my kids to bed, and it felt great. And I was thinking
Nice.
about this podcast, and I was thinking about the 2 of you keeping me accountable as I was doing that. So thank you for that.
That's very
In
impressive.
terms of doing it daily, what is your do it daily for the next 30 days?
Well, I have to be completely honest, Joel. I forgot what my do it daily was last time. I am human. It
Great.
got busy, so if you guys forgot yours as well, it's okay. I will just try better the next time.
Do you want me to text you?
Yeah. You want to be my buddy?
There we go, buddy system. See, I was thinking the exact same thing. I couldn't remember what mine was, but I think it had something to do with connecting with my kids, if I remember
I think so.
correctly.
Yeah, you're right.
Like even 5 minutes a night or something, because
Right?
that fills my
Yeah,
bucket.
yeah.
Luckily, unluckily, I do that no matter what, because my kids will seek me out.
There you
Whether
go.
I want the connection or not, they will seek me out and they'll want that to
So
happen.
good.
But it works, and that's going to be a monthly thing for me.
Okay.
A daily, monthly thing. That's always my number one priority, is
So
checking
good.
in.
I think you talked about checking with yourself for this month too, right? No?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and just checking out just with my own limitations. I think realizing where I'm maxing out and trying to navigate some of those tougher conversations with myself to give myself permission to let things go.
So for our listeners, how do you do that? Give us a little insight if they want to do that too.
If they want to,
Check in with themselves
Check in
and
with
use that
themselves.
strategy. Yeah.
Well, I think it's when you start having that internal script at the end of the day and you're going, should I did this? Should I do this? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I did this. You start going, no, this is as good as it gets. And I know you said that, Chantel. It's that reframing of that message in the brain, right? It is the reframing. You have to give yourself acceptance and go, I can't get to this today. It really sucks because I thought I could make this goal, but I'm going to make it for tomorrow instead.
Yeah.
So accepting where you're at.
And being flexible with your goals and your expectations, because our own expectations can be our own worst enemies sometimes. So being flexible, and I think for me it's the reflection part. At the end of the day, being mindful and consciously thinking about how am I doing?
Yeah.
Being able to check in with myself, because most of us live our days on autopilot.
That's
So
right.
true.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up my emotions wheel for the next 30 days. And I talk every day all the time to people about the emotional dashboard. Do I do it myself? No. So I got to do it, right?
Yes.
We have
Pull
to
up
do
my
it.
emotions wheel, and every day with my wife, I'm going to set my alarm for maybe 6:30 p.m. and chat about 2 emotions I had that day. Check in with my dashboard to actually check it out.
Yeah.
So that
I
sounds
like
great.
that.
Yeah.
We just so thank you for joining us today. So excited, so thankful for the responses. If you have questions, if you have ideas for our podcast, please connect with us virtually. We'd love to hear from you and build some of your questions into our next podcast and segments. Just such an honor to be with the two of you.
Yeah, it's been
Love doing this
wonderful.
together. It's so fun, such a highlight. And just to encourage you all as well, thank you for joining us. We want to provide some practical resources. So there's a little quiz that we're going to attach in the hyperlink to this podcast. So have a little peek. Don't be judgy with yourself. It's an awareness quiz of just finding 1 or 2 small things you can work on in terms of managing stress. We want to give you that little bit of
Felt my heart
extra
go, ooh, the quiz. Oh.
material as well, just to help yourself
Yeah.
in being able to journey with that. So thanks so much for joining us. Any final words, ladies?
No, this has been a pleasure. I think one of the last things we should say is reach out to community agencies and
Yes.
partners if you're feeling you need extra support, whether it be some other solutions or waypoints or the crisis line. Those are really important places. And CMHA, these are all places that you could connect with for support at any time. And it is important that we remind everyone about that.
So good.
Yeah, nobody should ever be alone
That's it.
in their emotions, and there's always support out there.
Exactly.
Yeah, so good. So whether it's a friend, whether it's a professional agency, a
That's it.
colleague at work,
Someone.
please reach out. You are not alone in your stress and fatigue. We are here to support you, and this wonderful community is here to support you as well.
Because your mental health matters.
Yes, I'm glad you threw it in there.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Please reach out to us if you have questions or comments about today's topic, or questions or suggestions for future topics. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, we encourage you to reach out to local agencies for support, as our podcast is not a substitute for counseling. If you require immediate support, please contact the crisis line or your local hospital.